Does Trump bear part of the responsibility for what happened?
Oh, yes. I mean, so the whole premise of talking to the Taliban before you leave Afghanistan, why the heck were we even doing that?
Biden pulled us out of Afghanistan. 13 Americans died. And now
the Taliban,
and now the Taliban tells us, back off, don't kill Al-Qaeda.
That's right.
Are you out of your mind, sir?
Same thing they would have done under Donald Trump.
Yesterday was the third anniversary of the tragic murder of 13 U.S. soldiers by an ISIS-K terrorist as the United States withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021. And MAGA Republicans across the country, including Donald Trump, took the opportunity to bash President Biden and Vice President Harris. And then awkwardly, MAGA was dealt a devastating blow on live TV when a former top Trump official admitted that Trump himself is partly to blame for what happened in Afghanistan. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. H.R. McMaster is a Republican former national security advisor in the Trump administration. He was Trump's top national security advisor. It's a guy who was a cabinet-level employee in the Trump White House. He knew Trump very well professionally. And he dealt MAGA a pretty devastating blow during a CNN interview last night, undermining their narrative that somehow President Biden and Vice President Harris incompetently, nefariously are solely responsible for the murder of 13 soldiers in Afghanistan. So we're going to play the clip and unpack it together.
But Trump had his hand on, does Trump bear part of the responsibility for what happened?
Oh, yes. I mean, so the whole premise of talking to the Taliban before you leave Afghanistan, why the heck were we even doing that?
He was going to invite them to Camp David.
Right. Even the Obama administration, when they made the mistake of pulling all of our troops out of Iraq in 2010, which really set conditions for the rise of ISIS and so forth by 2014, the Obama administration didn't negotiate with al-Qaeda in Iraq on the way out. And so if we were going to leave, why not just leave? What happened in these series of negotiations and concessions to the Taliban is we kind of threw the Afghans under the bus on the way out.
And they cut the Afghan government out of those negotiations, right?
Absolutely. So that was mistake one. Then forced them to release 5,000 of some of the most heinous people on earth, and then began
the Trump
to
administration
withdraw.
forced the Afghan government to release 5,000 Taliban.
Correct. And then also stopped the active targeting of the Taliban, which President Trump, again to his credit in 2017, had restored because he was convinced, like, how the heck does this make any sense? To give your enemy a timeline for your withdrawal and then say, now I'm going to negotiate a favorable settlement? I mean,
so it raises the question.
So again, that is H.R. McMaster, a conservative Republican national security advisor who, by the way, in that very clip, criticized President Obama, a Democrat, and praised Donald Trump for other decisions that he made. So this is not, some rhino. This is not some Democrat. This is a guy who likes Trump or tried to like Trump, tried to support Trump by working for him diligently and believes in conservative notions. Okay. But even he says in no uncertain terms that Donald Trump bears responsibility for what happened in Afghanistan. And this is something that we've talked about quite a bit on this channel. So not just as a matter of foreign policy, not just as a matter of the lives lost, not just as a matter of the historic significance of the withdrawal, given that we spent 20 years, it was America's longest war, but also for just sheer political reasons. The Afghanistan withdrawal, it was a turn point in the Biden administration because it was the beginning of the end of President Biden's popularity. As a reminder, he came into office with approvals in the mid to high 50s, right, which was much higher than Donald Trump ever had at any point in his political career. But that popularity was reduced, at least in part, because of what was seen as a chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. But it's important to remember, Trump was the one who made that deal. In February 2020, Donald Trump and the Trump administration, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo under Donald Trump, signed a direct deal with the Taliban, a direct deal with a terrorist organization, the Taliban, called the Doha Agreements. And they cut the Afghan government, the actual government of Afghanistan, our nominal allies, out of the negotiations. So they legitimized a terrorist organization, dealt with them directly, and cut out our allies. And by the way, there was a special inspector general's report, comprehensively examining the collapse of Afghanistan, the disaster that ensued with the withdrawal. And that report, as we've discussed on this channel, I've shown you the report, they say that there were multiple contributing factors to the collapse, but the single most important factor in the collapse of Afghanistan's government was the Doha Agreement signed by the Trump administration at Donald Trump's direction. So more than any other individual action, Donald Trump contributed to the collapse of Afghanistan more than President Biden. Then, of course, as I've mentioned in previous videos, not only did he set up the deal, he failed to enforce its terms. So there were multiple conditions as Trump appointed Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, and General McKenzie, the presiding general over that particular operation. As they discussed, there were multiple conditions that the Trump administration demanded of the Taliban. But Donald Trump never enforced them. The one condition that the Taliban honored was that they would not shoot U.S. troops. All the other conditions, they did not honor, and Trump did not enforce them. Meanwhile, Trump enforced all of the conditions demanded of him by the Taliban. So think about that. A terrorist goes to Donald Trump and says, hey, I have 5 or 6 things I demand that you do. And Trump honors all of them. And Trump in turn says, hey, I've got 5 or 6 things I need you to do, Mr. Terrorist. And Trump doesn't enforce that deal, except for one condition. This asymmetry is staggering. You also heard from H.R. McMaster, something we talked about before. Donald Trump pressured the Afghan government, which was already demoralized and cut out of the loop, to release 5,000 of their most heinous, most murderous fighters. Donald Trump gave the Taliban back 5,000 troops. He armed, he recruited effectively for the Taliban as a condition that the Taliban imposed on him, while not enforcing the conditions he demanded in turn of the Taliban. You see how incompetent and stupid it was? That 5,000 figure is also important because while all of this was going on, Donald Trump slowly withdrew U.S. troops. It's called a retrograde. He started to pull troops out of Afghanistan. There were some 13,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan at the times that the Doha agreements were signed. And by the end of Trump's term, there were 2,500. So think about that. He left 2,500 U.S. troops in Afghanistan while giving back twice that number of troops, 5,000, to the terrorist organization, the Taliban, which the Taliban then used to sweep the country. Also, while all that was going on, Donald Trump's Department of Defense did an audit and realized that they did not have an accurate count, audit, or tracking of U.S. sold, loaned, or equipment, U.S. sold or loaned equipment to Afghanistan. They basically told Donald Trump that, hey, listen, we don't know where a lot of our equipment is, the equipment that we gave or sold to Afghanistan or that just happens to be there. A country the size of multiple U.S. states. Donald Trump knew that that equipment was scattered across the country and that the DOD did not have a way to accurately track it, let alone collect it. And he continued to retrograde U.S. forces anyway. So anytime Donald Trump says they left $85 billion worth of equipment, I want you to think about that. Donald Trump had every opportunity and had far more opportunity, quite frankly, than the Biden administration to track and collect the equipment he thinks was left behind, and he failed to do so. What Donald Trump did was create a terrible situation and left President Biden to hold the bag. That's what he did. And he had 4 years to get us out of Afghanistan, which he promised to do. He promised when he was running for president, I'm going to end the forever wars. I'm going to get us out of Afghanistan. Instead, he was lazy. He dragged his feet. He inked a terrible deal in the 11th hour, failed to enforce that terrible deal's terms, making it even more terrible. And then he kicked the can down the road for the next guy to take care of. And President Biden was put in a really bad situation because what are your options? Well, your options are you shred the deal. And of course, MAGA Republicans say, well, Biden was president. Biden could have signed a new deal. Yes, it is true that legally, President Biden could have dishonored or disregarded the Trump administration's deal. Presidents can do that. But time doesn't reset when a new president is inaugurated. There's no cosmic reset. It's not like the Taliban would go, oh, okay, my bad, Mr. President Biden. You're not Mr. President Trump. You know what? Let's just scrap it and let's start from the beginning. No, if Biden had availed himself of his legal authority to disregard Trump's deal, as Mark Milley and General McKenzie and others have commented, that would have only incentivized the Taliban to start shooting U.S. troops again. Because as far as they're concerned, the U.S. government made a deal. It doesn't matter if you're a new president. We made a deal. We started to work on this deal. And if you don't honor that deal, there will be consequences. Then what would have happened? There would have been many more troop deaths, or President Biden would have effectively had to re-invade Afghanistan because 2,500 U.S. troops are not enough to control Afghanistan, particularly not from a hostile force, some 75, 80,000 strong, like the Taliban. The whole thing was a mess, and Trump set it up. I've got some other clips I want to play for you, but just some other things to remember. Yes, 13 U.S. soldiers died in Afghanistan on President Biden's watch, and he was the commander-in-chief, and he bears command responsibility for that. But so does Donald Trump, because Donald Trump set the circumstances for that withdrawal. And I'll also point out, to the extent that people want to clobber President Biden over the head with U.S. troop deaths, it's important to remember more U.S. troops died in Afghanistan, not just collectively, but in Afghanistan, the same country, under Donald Trump than Joe Biden. So if a MAGA Republican says, hey, 13 U.S. troops died on Joe Biden's watch, he's unfit to be president, you can respond with, well, by that grisly metric, 45 U.S. troops died in combat in Afghanistan under Donald Trump. Or excuse me, 65, according to audits from Newsweek and others, 65. So by that metric, Trump is objectively far more unfit to be president than President Biden or Vice President Harris. They lose the argument no matter what. Some other clips I want to play. One more from H.R. McMaster, when he's asked pretty bluntly, would he serve in another Trump administration?
Would you work in a Trump White House again?
No, I think, Anderson, I will work in any administration where I feel like I can make a difference, but I'm kind of used up with Donald Trump.
Would you work in a Harris administration?
So, according to H.R. McMaster, former Republican top Trump advisor, national security advisor, he wouldn't work in a Trump administration. He's not alone. I'll also point out that his successor, John Bolton, another conservative Republican national security advisor, another conservative advisor for multiple presidents, not just Trump, also had this to say about the Afghanistan withdrawal to a very hostile Trump-supporting Newsmax host.
You know what made us less safe, Ambassador?
Right.
You know what made us less safe is when Biden pulled us out of Afghanistan, 13 Americans died, and now
that was Trump's deal.
And now the Taliban tells us, back off, don't kill Al-Qaeda.
That's right.
Are you out of your mind, sir?
Same thing they would have done under Donald Trump. No.
Oh, come on.
So there you go. You have multiple top Trump national security advisors saying that Trump made the deal. Trump bears responsibility, including for the 13 U.S. soldiers who died under the Biden administration, because he set the conditions for that chaotic withdrawal, for those deaths. And we have no evidence, none whatsoever, that had Trump been in charge, that it would have been any better. As a matter of fact, we have plenty of evidence based on Trump's incompetence and stupidity, the fact that he made the damn deal in the first place, that it would have been much worse. That's more likely than the alternative. So all I'll say in the end is that as MAGA Republicans attempt to use this as a political cudgel against President Biden and Vice President Harris, the fact of the matter is the facts make them look worse than Biden and Harris do. And you have every right to point that out. Actually say, by all those standards, Trump is just objectively worse, objectively more incompetent, and objectively, quite frankly, more to blame for whatever it is you think happened there. So that's my position. I'm very passionate on this topic. We've talked about it at length, really since the channel started. And I would encourage you to, as Republicans continue to try to weaponize this in bad faith, that you continue to, pun intended, disarm them with the facts which favor us. And in the meantime, you let me know what you think in the comments.